today I'm the first speaker for Team 1003 on the negation. Is anyone not ready? Sounds good. In American government, kings are being disguised as presidents. The American Enterprise Institute explains presidents lead through executive actions which carry the full force of law, outnumbering actual laws every year. But because they're not passed through Congress, they're unstable. One president signs an order, the next repeals it, then another brings it back in a more extreme form, and the cycle keeps going. Indeed, half of Biden's first 50 actions are reversals of Trump's. And within hours of taking office, ABC reports, Trump rescinded 91 of Biden's orders, the most in history. Scarily, no one is stopping them. Howard, dean of Johns Hopkins School of Government, found when orders are challenged in court, the president wins 83% of the time. In Congress, they barely lift a finger. Out of all executive orders, they've only even responded to 3%, and not a single bill trying to limit one has ever made it out of committee. Thus, because orders are a tool of unlimited abuse, Adonai and I are proud to negate it. This tool causes two major harms. The first is policy whiplash. Endless orders have thrown the public into chaos. Rosen last year finds businesses, hospitals, and local governments just can't plan budgets or train staff when the rules keep changing. These swings have cost $1.7 trillion in losses. That's the entire economy of Spain. Nowhere is this worse than climate. Dr. Podesta at the Center for American Progress warned in 2020 that flip-flopping climate rules makes it impossible for the U.S. to lead international progress. Petruski of Columbia quantifies the damage over 30 years. Flip-flopping policies like joining and leading the Paris Agreement slashed research spending by 10% and clean energy patents by 2% every year. Disastrously, the University of Liverpool found last year that climate change is already raising sea levels in Asia and drying out farmland in Africa, forcing 900 million people to migrate, increasing conflict over food and water. Then, the second consequence is populism. Executive orders divide the people. The Democratic Erosion Consortium in 22 explains when each president undoes the last one's orders, it immediately highlights their most severe differences. This gives moderates an immediate reason to dislike the new president, fueling an us versus them mentality that creates more blame and less understanding. Dr. Burgett of Time warns that presidents' promises that I alone can fix it feeds a public craving for immediate action. Thus, presidents don't even pretend they'll work with Congress anymore, making people falsely believe that Congress is an ineffective body. Rachel Kleinfield at the Carnegie Endowment warned that this degradation of checks and balances opens the door to dangerous populism. And Dr. White of the U of Florida found last year that populism oversimplifies complex problems into emotional slogans, politicizing everything and destroying compromise on all future crises. Dr. Lee of Harvard warns populists to grade institutions, destroy collaboration, and ignore long-term threats for short-term appeasement. Thus, Rosen last year finds extreme orders have torn apart departments for the health, treasury, secretary, environment, and more. For instance, Reuters last month finds Trump used an order to cut 2,000 staff members from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and force 50% of all responsibility onto states. That's devastating, since FEMA has been crucial for responding to 639 fires, floods, and storms since 2020. Overall, Dr. Lee warns this dogmatic policymaking puts us at risk for all crises like the next virus, climate change, and future conflicts. Thus, to bring both sides of the aisle back to a democracy, we are proud to negate.
Actually, can we go for a couple pieces of evidence? Sure. So could we first get the $1.7 trillion in losses? And then could we also just get the flip-flopping on climate? I think you read a card about patents, so that one included with that?
Yeah.
Just those.
I sent the same cards to your teammate in a previous round, so I'll just forward that to you.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. Once we receive that, we'll be ready to pay.
Yeah.
Could you actually put it in the new email chain? Because one of the judges in this round is on the...
Gotcha.
Yeah.
No problem.
Let us know when you send it.
No problem. Just that.
Awesome.
Okay, sounds good.
Received it yet. Okay, I just got it.
Yes, sir.
Alright, so just to introduce myself, my name is Alan Liu. I am the first speaker on the Pro for Team 1121. Is everyone ready? Awesome. Time will just start my first word. Progress is never guaranteed. Warburton's of Reuters in 2024 finds that congressional action has nearly come to a pause as the number of bills passed last year hit a record low. From the wildfires in Maui to the hurricanes in the southeast, Lightman 25 contextualizes that this lack of congressional action led to relief funds being approved an entire year and a half after the disasters. Thus, because executive orders are not always the solution we want, but simply the solution we need, Gaurav and I affirm the resolution, on balance, in the United States, the benefits of presidential executive orders outweigh the harms. Our sole contention is responding to crisis. When executive orders may seem unchecked and prone to abuse, given today's political climate, safeguards are readily in place to prevent misuse. As Representative 25 notes that the presidents must abide by both the Congress and the courts in order to pass orders, ensuring that they are both constitutional and in good faith. Thus, even when presidents do try to act outside their authority, the judicial branch has already shown they aren't afraid to put their foot down. Just this month, Knudsen25 writes that despite Trump's attempts to exceed executive authority, he has lost 96% of rulings in federal courts, putting his efforts on hold. And even when the courts aren't involved, Rebuttal 21 analyzed nearly 100 years of executive orders and finds that the vast majority of executive orders are proposed by federal agencies, not the president, and are extensively negotiated by members inside the executive branch, making executive orders inherently multilateral decisions. Therefore, because nearly every president realizes that they cannot abuse executive orders to create unreasonable policies without backlash, Wiley 23 finds that the majority of executive orders are used during times of crisis to facilitate swift action, not for presidents to promote their own interests. Specifically, executive orders have provided a lifeline for millions of Americans during times of crisis in two key ways. First is by preventing recessions. When the economy is in freefall, executive orders have historically served as a crucial cushion for recovery. Penders 23 confirms that presidents use executive orders during economic emergencies to suspend regulations, control prices, and provide financial assistance to affected individuals and businesses. Empirically, looking back to the latest recession in 2020, Egan 21 finds that Biden was able to use executive orders to increase food assistance programs by 15%, increase federal minimum wages, and provide stimulus checks for those who lost their jobs, providing a crucial lifeline for millions of Americans. However, these orders are not only limited to short-term programs like food stamps and stimulus checks. During the 80s, Pierce 18 finds that Reagan was able to use executive orders to force government agencies to maximize economic benefits when creating new regulations, creating an environment where economic benefits became 10 times more than cost. His order created long-term growth, producing trillions of dollars of economic benefits over the next 30 years. Second is during pandemics. As COVID spread throughout the country, time could not be wasted to pass bills in Congress. Instead, through executive orders, the UN 21 finds that Biden was able to rejoin organizations like the World Health Organization to facilitate the creation of vaccines. While Stolberg 21 finds Biden was also able to reopen enrollment into key medical programs like the Affordable Care Act. Because of this ability to act swiftly through executive orders, Bowers 21 quantifies that 14.8 million Americans gained access to medical benefits under Medicaid, which Fitzpatrick 22 furthers, saved over 3 million lives. Thus, to promote a tried and tested solution to crises that has helped millions of Americans time and time again, Leland is proud to affirm.
Do we have two pieces of evidence?
Yeah.
First, Trump is losing 96% of court cases.
Mm-hmm.
Second, that most orders are proposed by agencies.
Yeah. I can send both.
And and two others. Majority of EOs during crisis and Biden reopened Obamacare.
Yep, I'll send the next two you just said.
Okay.
And we're not prepping.
Yep, we know.
Alright, I just sent the first two cards over.
I just sent the next two.
We'll let you know once they come through.
Sounds good.
And after that, we can go straight into cross if you're ready.
Yeah, sorry, give me a second.
No problem.
Okay, I just got Alan's email, so let me know when you guys get that.
Yeah, we got that. We're still waiting on the second one.
Okay.
Gara.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just got that too.
Alright, ready? Do you prefer crossfire, standing or sitting, or?
We can do it up here if you're okay with it.
Awesome, yeah. Since I just spoke, you can take the first question.
Thanks. Alright. Time starting now. You tell me that most executive orders are proposed by agencies.
Yeah,
Who appoints the people that lead the agencies?
I would say the president.
Alright, you can take a question.
Awesome. So let's go to your second contention about populism, right? You specifically mentioned that executive orders lead to more polarization and more conflict inside Congress. Even if we do vote for the con, does that mean polarization would still exist?
That's a great question, and it's very simple. Polarization is a complex issue, but when we see the different kinds of attributing factors to polarization, our American Enterprise Institute study is very specific. The fact that executive orders give extreme candidates a target to point fingers at is precisely why we see this large-scale extremism and this large-scale polarization that we've never seen
So-
before. But I'll take a question.
Really quickly though, I just want a quick follow-up. Even if there isn't any executive orders, don't you think there are alternative causes to these more extreme polarization? For instance, the media is a huge reason why there's polarization today, with some media outlets driving people more right and people more left.
So I'm sure you can give me a lot of examples, but I've already answered your question. Our study encompasses all of this and still finds that executive orders are so tempting for pointing fingers at this creates a unique form of polarization
Sure.
and
You
more
can take the question.
importantly, populism. All right, let's go to Trump's win rate, right?
Yeah.
Or I guess you should say loss rate. Holistically, who wins in court? The
Right.
president or executive or Congress?
Right. It's not about Trump versus Congress in the courts. It's essentially saying that there's a lot of federal judges and lawyers out there who are challenging Trump's executive orders right now. And essentially, when Trump signed a bunch of his executive orders on his first day, all these people came out and challenged him in court. That's exactly why he's losing 96% of rulings right now. And more importantly, it shows that Trump can't just sign a bunch of executive orders exceeding his authority. There are courts and people out there who will check
Okay,
it.
I have two things
Yeah.
for that. One, I'm really glad you said that it's not about Trump because I agree. Because holistically, when you look at centuries of data, 83% of the time, presidents still win in court. But second, Ad and I will tell you later how
Right.
your statistics says Trump is losing in the lower courts. But when you work your way up the bureaucratic ladder, Trump is still winning
So-
where it matters most. But I'll take a question.
Sure.
Or did I just take a question? You can take a question.
Yeah. Well, actually, I just want to quickly respond to that, right?
Sure.
You mentioned that of all time, in the history of America, presidents have won 87% of the time. The reason why presidents win almost 80% of the time is because a lot of the executive orders they pass are constitutional, right? When we look towards Trump right now, a lot of the executive orders he's passing are not constitutional. For instance, the executive order to ban birthright citizenship is absolutely not constitutional. That's why we're seeing the courts put their foot down and eventually stop it. So sure,
Okay,
maybe in all of history, 87% have
I
won.
understand.
But the reason why 87% have won is because those executive orders are constitutional. When Trump is trying to sign unconstitutional executive orders, we've seen in the past the courts put their foot down. But that's
And I will
cross.
give you a litany of other responses in his speech. Thank you. Good crossfire.
Mm-hmm. Alright, will you guys be taking cross? Or sorry, prep.
Yeah,
Yes.
we'll start that now. a minute and 6 seconds used. We have a minute 54 seconds remaining.
The order's just going to be down their case compared to throw. Is anyone not ready? Okay. In that case, just to clarify, my name is Adnai. I am the second speaker. This will be the first rebuttal for the negative, team 1003. Okay. It took Congress 1 day to address Pearl Harbor, 3 days to address 9/11, 5 days to address the Great Recession, and just a week to address COVID. History very clearly shows that Congress can do everything executive orders can, but better, because there are actual limits. Across 5 decades of analysis, Congress only chose to look at 3% of executive orders, has never passed any legislation limiting the president, and in the courts, presidents have won 83% of the time. They're going to come up here and tell you that the presidents who have won in court have never done anything unconstitutional. And that is a flat-out lie. Look towards Nixon's breaches of power, FDR's Japanese internment, Bush's oppression of Muslims during 9/11, the abuses of the NSA, and Trump now on immigration. Bad actors exist all across history, and this tool just empowers them. But let's look towards Trump's win rate specifically. We would tell you that in 10 out of 12 cases, according to Brilliant 25, Trump has won in the appellate courts, where he is able to reverse these lower court districts. Therefore, you're preferring our analysis here. But let's look towards their arguments specifically. First, on recessions. Look towards the New Deal as your best example of a recovery. As then, presidential advice was combined with congressional action. According to the House Archives Committee, the New Deal was a combination of a bunch of congressional policies that increased minimum wage, set maximum work lengths, created public services, and eased the suffering of American families, preventing a larger collapse that could have pushed 900 million people into poverty. It's the greatest recession in history. You're always looking towards there for the best response. But let's look towards their empirics on COVID. First, they try to push you that Biden's acts on food aid were really good. But remember that these executive orders came before the CARES Act and ended up preventing any sort of compromise, leading to an 8-month delay in Congress, pushing 8 million people into poverty. Further, these acts did not use funding from Congress. They shifted the burden to states, $1.5 billion for every state, which cut away at Medicaid and Medicare access. That's horrible in a pandemic and horrible in general. But let's look towards other economic assessments. Presidents who end up getting involved in recessions lack the knowledge and consult their cronies who they put in office. Look towards Zatiz in 24, referencing Nixon's response to a recession. The administration failed to stop stagflation, tried to cut back spending, and ended up increasing unemployment to 8.7%, one of the highest rates in history. It's very clear here. Someone without checks and without knowledge is just going to produce bad outcomes. That's a problem with the tool. But let's look towards pandemics specifically. They try to say that executive orders were key to saving us in COVID, but it's wrong for a few reasons. Painter in Georgetown in 21 outlines Congress passed $6 trillion worth in aid within the first 11 days. But delays ended up happening because of executive orders. As Treisman of Yale outlines that executive orders backfired, sparking partisan fighting and court battles that slowed the rollout of the aid that they're talking about. Crisis needs unity and speed. Executive orders deliver neither. But let's look towards vaccines specifically. Their claim that executive orders created the vaccine is false for 2 reasons. First, Fortune reported in 2020 that Pfizer was funded by the German government over $400 million to develop the vaccine. And second, the executive order rollout of vaccines was one of the worst in history, as Doctors Without Borders found that the US hoarded 500 million life-saving doses, letting 82 million go bad due to inaction. The global harms of the abuse of one man always outweigh the minimal benefits of hoarding, since vaccines hesitancy was already high. Finally, they try to say that they reopened Obamacare using executive orders. It was closed because of them too. Vote Nick.
So I want to call for a couple pieces of evidence. Can I see that the economy went down under Nixon? Can I see that the executive orders led to delays in the stimulus checks?
I'm sending Nixon.
I have a third one, but I can wait to say it.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay. Just sent Nixon.
Okay. So the second one is delays.
I can get that.
Are you guys seeing me?
We're graduating.
Where are you guys?
I'm going to UCLA, he's going to Berkeley.
Awesome, so you're staying in Cali.
Yeah.
Okay, I just sent it out. I'm gonna send the evidence about the 8-month delay as well. Did you want that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Alright, sounds good. Thank you.
no problem. Will you be running prep time?
Yeah, we'll run prep once we get all the evidence.
Okay, just sent the last of it. Let me know once you subscribe.
Okay.
I got the first two, I think. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the third. Yeah, I got all three. So we're gonna take running prep to read the evidence. Time for our prep will start now.
Alright, that was 44 seconds.
Thank you, Tom. So just to introduce myself for the judges, my name is Gaurav Rao. I'm the second speaker for the pro for team 1121. The order of the speech is going to be talking about the AF arguments, defending them from what you just heard, and then it moves to the neg arguments. So everybody ready? Sounds good. If everybody's ready, then time just starts on my first word. The thesis of the affirmative was never that executive orders are necessarily better than congressional action. The thesis of the affirmative is that when Congress doesn't act, executive orders have a plan B, and even when Congress does act, executive orders fills in the gaps. The first thing that they say at the top of our case is that Congress took 1 day to address things like COVID. However, what they have conceded is the fact is that even though Congress took 1 day to pass things like stimulus checks, these stimulus checks got delayed due to structural errors inside of the Department of Treasury. What did Biden do? He passed executive orders that forced the Treasury to update their regulations and procedures, which led to the stimulus checks actually not being delayed. The second thing that they say is that, only 3% of executive orders are looked at by Congress. However, even if Congress isn't looking at executive orders, as so far they have conceded that Trump is losing 96% of rulings. Even if Congress isn't checking the orders, the courts definitely are. Also, they have fully conceded the fact that executive agencies are the ones who are proposing the executive orders. This was not interacted with in the last speech. So even if the courts aren't checking, given executive agencies have power in making these proposals, it is not one king like they talk about. They just try saying that presidents are able to overturn things like the court and pass unconstitutional orders like things like the NSA or the 9/11's Bush response. However, things like the NSA were done through memorandums. This is the alternative to executive orders, and the illegal torture techniques that they talk about were done through memorandums, not executive orders. Memorandums are a worse alternative to executive orders, if anything, because these cannot be checked in courts, meaning if Bush had acted through executive orders, things like illegal torture techniques after 9/11 would have never happened in the first place. On our argument about preventing recessions, they tried talking about New Deal policies getting us out of recession. However, a crucial part of the New Deal was the Work in Progress Administration, which was signed by Truman through an executive order. Also, they just say that the economy went down during Nixon. No, their evidence does not isolate executive orders as the reason why the economy went down. It just said that the economy went down for other reasons, not executive orders.
On our second argument about pandemics, they just say that, oh, first, Congress is able to act. However, remember what we tell you. Even if Congress acts, executive orders can streamline things like delays in congressional legislation. They say that, oh, executive orders led to less bipartisanship. However, their evidence finds that first, this executive order was passed by Trump, and secondly, it got upheld in courts, meaning that even though it should have caused delays, the courts challenged the order and it didn't cause delays. At that point, you know executive orders only remove delays, they don't cause them. With that said, let's go to their case. On their fundamental thesis of the case, they talk about at the top things like overreach. However, what our evidence concludes is that if presidents don't use executive orders, they use memorandums. And as they themselves tells you, things like the NSA and illegal torture techniques are terrible and only happen because the judicial branch could not check them. On their argument about reversibility, first off, things like executive orders are not reversed that often. What our evidence indicates is that 75% of executive orders are not overturned, which means while they're trying to make it seem like every other executive order is overturned, that is not the case. 75% of them are never revoked, which proves there is long-term stability. But also, they talk about things like investor confidence going down. However, if you look at their evidence, the one industry that they talk about going down was the green mineral industry. All of their other examples don't say that industries went down. Meaning if you think the green mineral industry is key to the US economy, then sure, you can vote neg. But when every other industry is resilient, it's true that Trump's executive orders did not wreak havoc on the economy. If anything, our Chen evidence concludes that optimism and things like investment went up after executive orders because Trump deregulated agencies, which proves the economy does not go in free fall due to executive orders. On their second argument about populism, they try saying that polarization will increase. However, they have conceded in Crossfire there's alternative things for polarization. For example, political donors can force congressional members to go to extremes just for money, which are things that executive orders don't address. But on FEMA, executive orders created FEMA in the first place. All of the wildfires they talk about would have never been able to be solved if it wasn't for an order. Thus, vote pro.
Sounds good.
We have 1 minute before, so we had 10 minutes, 10 seconds.
Do you want the first question?
Yeah. So we can start. Yeah, we could start time now. You tell me that things like natural disaster response and the environment are important. What created FEMA and the EPA?
FEMA and the EPA were created independently. All the executive order that Clinton signed was move it under the DHS.
So executive
Do you
orders
mind letting me
created
finish
the
my
EPA,
response?
right?
I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
Insofar as they don't tell you what this move does, they don't give you a source, who, what, when, where, why, it's just a random claim they make. The EPA was never mentioned in rebuttal. It's completely new here.
Okay, so let's talk, wait, can I just repeat the question again?
Yeah.
Was FEMA created by an executive order?
No, it was an independent agency before an executive order moved into
So
the
when
DHS.
did it start? Was it there from the beginning of the government?
No, it started created in the Earth in like the mid-1900s.
Okay, so let's just settle this. If we name you the exact executive order number in summary that FEMA was created by, will you agree that executive orders were key to FEMA?
No, because you're going to name the executive order by Clinton, which moved into the DHS. It was an independent agency before. You're being ahistoric. Do you mind if I ask?
It wasn't by Clinton, but sure.
It was by Clinton. Okay. So let's go to this argument on. Okay, let's start on pandemics. So what procedure was used to disseminate vaccines throughout the U.S.?
What does disseminate vaccines?
Give
Does
out.
disseminate mean like burn? Okay, yeah. So to give out vaccines, we would say our argument isn't necessarily about giving out vaccines. Our argument is about things like vaccine production, right? What our argument says is that when things like vaccine manufacturing got slowed, Biden signed executive orders to increase things like manufacturing. And even when people had to buy things like vaccines, our evidence concludes that things like the Affordable Care Act were only reopened by Biden. So even if other countries funded the vaccines, you can only get them if you have things like insurance.
That sounds really great.
Yeah.
You completely undercover two key responses. First, that the states had to take the burden, which cut down Medicare and Medicaid, e.g. health insurance, to pay for the vaccines, and also that the distribution was so bad we had more variants popping up in other countries, which just ended up prolonging the pandemic in the U.S.
So we didn't
it's about
really,
herd immunity of the globe.
So we
not
didn't
just the
really
US.
not respond to it. What you're bringing up is an executive order that Trump passed. However, your own evidence says that Democrats said that they were going to upheld it in court, and there was an injunction placed on the
That's
exact
not the
executive
evidence
order
I was
that.
talking about. I'm talking about the Doctors Without Borders evidence I read at the bottom of your case that goes completely unaddressed.
No, it's not addressed. And also, even if there was some shift to states, our evidence concludes that 14 million people weren't supposed to gain medical access. They actually gained medical access because of Biden's executive
Your
order.
evidence talks about reopening Obamacare.
Yes.
Who closed it?
I mean, Obamacare closed after the next president, but
Okay.
it wasn't through an
Wait,
executive
wait,
order.
wait.
It was through a presidential directive.
Okay, so it was a presidential directive, correct?
Sure,
Why did they close it?
because they didn't like Obamacare.
Okay. Do you want a question?
Is that necessarily bad?
Yeah, because
Are we debating about directives or orders?
we're debating about populism as well. Whenever a president
Is this
politicizes the basic idea of healthcare and any other topic,
Okay, that's
that's
the-
why we go back and
Okay,
forth.
that's
and
the end
it
of
gets
process.
closed.
Yep.
We have 10 seconds left.
Okay.
We'll use that as well. I'll stop that there, that's all we're done. The order of my speech will be an overview at the top about constitutionality of Congress, continuing to discuss our negative case, responding to their affirmative case. Is anyone not ready? At the end of the day, when our opponents tell you executive orders are a plan B for Congress, they should be used as a plan B. But the truth is, they are constantly abused as a plan A for presidents to simply use them as a scapegoat to commit atrocities against Americans. That's why the moral weight of the atrocities committed by executive orders, even for the years they were in place before they were returned, is enough for you to sign your ballot. Ad-Night tells you Jackson's Trail of Tears, unconstitutional. Japanese internment of hundreds of thousands of Americans, unconstitutional. Muslim ban by Bush, unconstitutional. And LGBTQ being stripped away by Trump are all examples of how human rights are being completely violated by the executive orders. But then, let's go to our case on populism, where the best place to sign your ballot is that we tell you the power of executive orders has changed the presidency from a position to advance American progress to one that reverses everything the last president has done, that hinders long-term progress because any issue in the name of crushing their predecessor's legacy, that caused Congress to decide, undermines key agencies like FEMA, and brings us dangerously close to the kind of centralized power our founders feared. Their single and only response in the last speech is that there are vaguely alternative causes. But insofar as since my first crossfire, I've told you that the American Enterprise Institute's study of all causes of polarization is very specific, that this causes us specifically to point fingers and become more divided, that is the strongest way to enforce extremism. At that point, their only other response is executive orders created FEMA. That's not true. It existed as an independent agency beforehand, and executive orders simply renamed it. At that point, destroying FEMA using executive orders is a prior question to any impact in this round, because we are now jeopardized and putting millions of Americans at risk for the very crises the affirmative wants to talk about. Very quickly, on their point about green energy and that executive and on like green minerals and executive orders like increase our economy, first Trump literally tanked the global economy by $34 billion using executive orders for his tariffs. And second, green minerals are important, for example, for semiconductors. But more importantly, let's go to where you're much more unsure on our opponent's case. First, we tell you that currently even though Trump is losing in the lower courts, he's winning in the upper courts, which means that executive orders, though unconstitutional, are actually sticking. That's why, on COVID, Adonai tells you that Congress passed $6 trillion in only 11 days. It doesn't matter how much rollout that the executive orders actually did, insofar as Congress set the foundation for a total response to COVID. That is a prior question. But second, as Adonai tells you that the executive orders allowed us to hoard 82 million vaccines, that's 82 million lives we could have saved internationally that executive orders simply took away. But then, on recessions, Adonai tells you that Congress was the actual foundation of the New Deal, and the executive orders only implemented it. But then, Nixon also destroyed the economy, increasing unemployment by 8.7%. At the end of the day, if the president wins 83% of the time, you're always voting for the negative.
All right, we'll be taking running prep. So time can start now.
Alright, that was 2 minutes and 2 seconds of prep. So we took 46 in the beginning, so we have like 10 seconds left. Yeah.
So again, just for clarification, Alan Liu, first speaker on the pro for Team 1121. The order of my speech is going to be covering the pro case and then moving over to the con case. Is everyone ready? All right, time will just begin on my first word. You didn't hear the word recessions until the final 10 minutes of that last speech. That's exactly why you're voting for the pro. Remember what we tell you. During times of recession, like the COVID recession, we saw Biden able to step in with his executive orders, and as a result, he increased the federal minimum wage. He was able to provide food to millions and spend stimulus checks for millions of Americans, saving lives. They only give you one response at the end of this round, which tells you that the New Deal was a legislation signed by Congress, which also helped during the Great Depression. But remember what Gaurav tells you, the Works Progress Administration, which is part of the New Deal, was created by an executive order. If anything, their response goes towards our side because we would tell you executive orders also helped during the Great Depression. At the point where you know that executive orders can be used during a time of a recession, when millions of Americans are suffering, you can easily vote for the pro here. It's the least responded to. But lastly, on a general oversight, they try to tell you that courts can't check against presidential executive orders. But remember our study, 96% of court cases against Trump are succeeding. That's why when Trump is trying to exceed his executive authority, he's losing 96% of federal cases. It doesn't matter if it's a federal court or a lower court, he's losing 96% of all courts. But then lastly, they try to give you this response that Congress can be just as fast. But this misses the mark. Our argument isn't about whether or not executive orders are better or worse than Congress. Our argument is that Congress and executive orders can work together to effectively respond to a crisis. That's what we've seen in the past. For instance, during the pandemic, we were able to work together in order to actually respond and save lives. When there's delays in stimulus checks and legislation, Biden signed executive orders getting rid of those delays, as a result, saving 3 million lives. Remember, today's topic is about Congress and executive orders working together to adequately respond to crisis. At the end of the day, knowing that the recession's argument is basically dropped, you're easily voting for the pro. But with that in mind, let's go to my opponent's case. First off, on their argument about polarization, there are alternative causes to polarization. Sure, maybe their evidence says that executive orders might lead to a little bit of polarization, but if there are alternative causes to the impact that they are talking about, it means that voting for the con doesn't even solve for the problem that they are talking about. At the end of the day, remember that, judges, even if you vote for the con, they're not even solving the problem that they are talking about. But even if you don't buy that response, remember, the FEMA, which responds to natural disasters, was literally created by an executive order. If anything, their impact goes towards our side because we tell you that if FEMA was created by an executive order, then the presidential executive orders are literally saving lives by creating agencies. At the end of the day, remember our recessions argument. It was basically dropped this entire debate. At the end of the day, during times of recessions, Biden and other presidents can use executive orders to increase our economy during a dark time and as a result, save millions and millions of lives. It's really clear valid for the pro.
You guys ready for round?
Yeah.
Do you like the first question?
Yeah.
Alright.
So time can start now. When was FEMA officially created?
1979.
And who created it?
I'm pretty sure it was Carter.
Yeah, so how did Carter create it?
All Carter did was try to move it under the THS.
No, that's okay. So at first you said Clinton tried moving it out of the
Yeah.
DHS. Let's be very clear here. But secondly, Carter signed Executive Order 11217. Executive Order 11217 quite literally established the agency of FEMA. So if your argument is contingent on FEMA being good, but also FEMA was created through an executive order, how can an executive order be bad?
Okay, so let's take it at the highest level.
Sure.
Let's assume FEMA was created through an executive order.
Yes.
That means that a tool that was used to create some sort of good could easily be reversed by a bad actor in the future.
Right.
What does that sound like? The idea of demonizing the state of government, critiquing institutions, and trying to push for immediate action that the people want. That is literally populism by definition.
So that's-
all you
isn't-
have done, okay,
That
please
isn't
let me
necessary.
finish. By definition, you have proven that government institutions previously established by better presidents like Carter can be torn down by worse presidents like Trump, which means we're eroding our functions of government, and that's a very
That's
clear reason
not
to decide a
necessarily
negative
true.
ballot.
Because the whole point of having a democracy is even if you might disagree with Trump's actions, the whole point of a democracy is that the people can choose what policies they want. We are not saying that FEMA should have been cut, but we are saying it's not necessarily undemocratic for Trump to say, I want to reduce the number of employees inside of FEMA. The entire point of having an executive branch is to have swift policy making, and we would say the alternative to having a constant policy, like for example, FEMA should constantly be in place, is what we see in things like autocracies, where you have one president who sits in one chair for 50 years and keeps one policy for a while.
Okay,
Yeah.
you've been talking for over 40 seconds. There are
Yeah, sure.
two key distinctions to make. First, the false assumption that Congress is unable to act just as fast as executive orders. Second, the only thing that makes those two things different is that one has a system of checks and balances that actually represents the democracy you are talking about, in contrast to an executive order that's simply written with a pen and phone in the Oval Office.
So,
if you let me finish,
Yeah,
please.
sure.
What we are critiquing, again, just like you, isn't the fact that there are good and bad executive orders. It's the system that allows these
We agree with you.
Yeah.
If you,
I mean, you've been talking for
For
40
a minute,
seconds.
It's a
yeah.
system
So,
that allows these atrocities to slip through, and that's the thesis of our argument.
So
in the end.
we agree with you. Checks and balances are very important. But also an argument you never responded to is that if presidents are not using executive orders, things like the NSA surveillance and illegal torturing that you brought up in rebuttal were done through things like memorandums. Because if presidents don't use executive orders, they use memorandums. What's the difference? Memorandums don't go through the courts, and they don't have a legislative check. So we would say the alternative is a lot worse for
The
checks.
primary problem with that statement is, one, it's not brought up in the rest of the round, and two,
We did bring this
that
up.
the NSA, it's
That's
not in the
false.
summary. The NSA was not done through an executive order, or not done through
We
a
have
memorandum.
evidence for it, but sure.
We have evidence for it too. We can
Okay.
go back and forth.
Yep.
The order is just going to be three main failures to executive orders. Is anyone not ready? Just to clarify, my name is Adonai. First final focus, negative, team 1003. They're going to come up here and push to you the fact that executive orders are the fastest way to respond to its crisis. But they concede that Congress has continually, throughout history, quickly addressed crises by allocating funds to agencies that are responsible. A day on Pearl Harbor, 3 days on 9/11, 5 days on the Great Recession, and just a week on COVID. On the back and forth in courts, there's a lot of clash here, but it's really clear that you're signing the negative ballot here for one reason. Trump is winning in the Court of Appeals. Their evidence, I implore you to look at it, talks about lower federal courts. The appeals overturn the lower federal courts, which means Trump is winning. Their 96% analysis is highly inaccurate and out of date at that point. So a tool without checks that responds to crises at the same speed as Congress then has one of the largest harms. It's able to villainize American citizens for purely their race. Japanese internment by FDR, who they've been talking about as such a great president. Bush when it comes to 9/11 and targeting Muslims specifically. Trump when it comes to LGBTQ rights, taking away due process for immigrants because of a fentanyl crisis, and his increasing abuse of declaring emergency. If you want to have an actual timely response without a president's cronies pushing one thing, you're signing the negative ballot. Let's look towards the second failure. We tell you that through disastrous populism, the power of executive orders has changed the presidency into a tool for reversing everything the last administration has done. That hinders long-term progress and casts Congress to the side. No legislation, which means you can't respond to crisis properly. Because like they said, you need function to implement. If they're taking away funding to implement anything, you can never sign the ballot on crises. But look towards recessions specifically. The main failure they concede is that the New Deal specifically is a combination of congressional policies. They're going to come up here and push to you this idea of this one program signed through an executive order. But when the vast majority of the actual fixing was done through a congressional policy, you're preferring action that's controlled in a democratic system. Vote nay.
Just to introduce myself one last time, my name is Gaurav Rao. I'm the second speaker for the pro for team 1121. The order of this speech is just going to be a high-level overview of the round. Then it's going to be talking about the AF arguments and then the neg arguments. All judges ready? Sounds good. With that being said, time just starts on my first word. The one impact that they had gone for in summary was their impact about natural disasters. The one executive order you didn't hear about in their last speech was Executive Order 12127. Their own evidence says that executive orders were created through the FEMA was created through executive orders. So if they're trying to tell you that FEMA was crucial and they have conceded the fact that FEMA was created by Carter through an executive order, there is literally no way they can win this round. At that point where that is conceded, you look to our case first. On our case, our argument is very simple. We are not saying that it has to be either Congress or executive orders. We are telling you that these two can work together. For example, during COVID, Congress passed stimulus checks to the people, but when they got delayed, Biden passed executive orders to help fix those delays. We aren't saying that one is better than the other. We're saying that they can work together to have a unified response. That's why during Congress, we were able to expand medical benefits by 15 million people and save over 3 million lives. Their one response by the end of the round was just saying that Congress can act quickly. We agree. Congress acted quickly, but when problems came up within congressional legislation, the thing that saved it was an executive order. At that point, the round should be very clear. This is not a debate about whether executive orders are better than congressional action. It's a debate about whether executive orders can help congressional action. With that said, you know that we're winning our argument about pandemics, but let's talk about why they aren't winning their case. On their argument about populism, they have cold conceded the fact that things like political donations are what are driving polarization inside of Congress. In the last speech, they just repeat their argument without addressing things like alternative causes causing things like polarization. So at that point, you cannot vote for this argument. Also, remember what their impact was. Their own impact was about FEMA, but we have proven that was created through an executive order. The last thing that they talk about is overreach. However, they have conceded that alternatives to executive orders like memorandums are much worse for overreach because they don't go through things like the courts, and Bush used memorandums when he did the 9/11 torture techniques that they talk about. It's very clear you vote pro.